City Skylines 2 has some big priorities and challenges ahead for 2024, and in this video we're going to cover the first news update delivered by Colossal Order, where we hear about their top priorities for the year, some insights into the first patches, and the console editions, as well as a note on community toxicity at the end. Let's jump in. They open the update by saying it's gonna be a busy year, and here are some highlights. The first one, and probably the most important thing, is that they say there is no higher priority than releasing modding support to the game. The editor UI, by the way, is expected to be ready enough for a closed beta in a few weeks. Now, if you remember back to last year, which you may not, but here it is as a reminder, they talked a little bit about this beta being open to creatives and modders rather than just you and I. However, we can sign up for it. And they also hinted at the fact that it would probably last for a few weeks. So fingers crossed, we might see a version of this sooner than we expected. Though, judging by the sounds of what they're saying, we're still looking at a month or two out at least. They go on to say that there's a bit of an issue with the asset import. They're still trying to fix it, but in the meantime, they're considering releasing the editor without the ability to import customized assets in. Instead, just having maps and code modding. Honestly, I probably speak on behalf of lots of us by saying, all good, just give me something. Give me the maps. But seriously though, it seems like there are still some difficulties around the edges. I would anticipate this is likely still rolling out in the first half of this year. How long? We'll have to wait and see. Leading on from that, you may remember that they don't want to release the console version of the game until the editor, or at least the slightly stripped down version of the editor, is ready. And so they say that the console versions will also have that editor, minus the code modding, regardless of the outcome. So the editor is a high priority, but likewise stability and performance on console. They want to make the game available, quote, as soon as possible, end quote. The schedule for the coming months, the editor, the console releases, the early access program for modders, they say, will be available later. It's nice to see a mention of stability and performance there related to the console version. I was a little bit surprised to see that simulation performance wasn't mentioned as a top priority or one of the leading priorities in their introductory remarks. However, they do touch on it a little bit in our next paragraph, where we learn a bit about what we can expect from maybe patch 1 and patch 2 in 2024. This one perhaps best read verbatim. They say that before the editor release, we'll have a bug fix patch that will include fixes for issues that have been resolved while the work above is ongoing. You can expect fixes for simulation and visual bugs, both based on internal findings and issues reported by you. The patch notes will be available when the patch is released. Thanks for all the reports. To read between the lines here a little bit, and it's not that hard, basically what they're saying is there'll be a patch. The patch will fix simulation and visual bugs and other bugs that we've reported, and that patch will almost certainly come before the big sort of editor rollout update. These are, loosely speaking, our expectations for Cities 2. I predict there'll probably be 1 or 2 smaller patches around bug fixes and fingers crossed something about performance. And then we'll see the modder roll out, I don't know, crystal ball gazing, March, April. We'll have to wait and see. To briefly interject with a bit of a lighthearted moment before we talk about toxicity. You've seen this clip already in the video, but have you seen the greatest driving moment of all time? Sure, you've been to the mall and panicked and curbed your car, but never, have you ever, driven a giant ship onto the curb? I love it. I actually love it. And the remainder of this week's update isn't spent on updating the game or talking about its priorities, and you'll notice this video is a bit shorter than a normal kind of news or update video, and that's because the rest of it talks about community toxicity, the kind of backlash that they've felt, and some suggestions on how we might engage in future. First, they open up by strictly addressing toxicity. They say that last but not least, they've seen a growing tendency of toxicity, something they have not experienced to this extent before. Not only directed towards the devs, but other community members, and that ultimately results in hesitation to engage and maybe ruins the mood, happiness, and creativity, the longevity of a modding community. And here, I think they're bang on. Does it need to be said? Well, clearly from their perspective, it does. I'm not quite so sure it needs to be put exactly the way it was, but the message is absolutely sound. As someone who's vaguely creative sometimes, I can attest to that. Of course, if you're surrounded by toxicity, you're not going to have the energy to be creative. And then to bring it back both to the broader idea of this video as well as the game, City Skylines 2, they shift the tone a little bit and start talking about how this toxicity could impact what we hear about Cities 2, when we hear about it, the how, the what, where, why. They say that they've always treasured having their devs out there communicating with people, but their responsibility is to protect. They move on to say that as mentions of this in previous entries don't seem to have moved the needle, i.e. we're still facing a lot of toxicity. They say, perhaps you have a constructive way of telling us how you can improve the way we communicate with each other. Should we add more moderation? Or is the only option to pull back our engagement on our end? How can we make sure the community is a safe place for you to share your thoughts and hopes for the game? They then move on to share a few ideas, like give feedback and disagree, but do it constructively, be specific and detailed. Assume people mean well, and remember that tone can be difficult. Help us make the community a nice place by showing mayors how to give feedback and be kind. And I can see this being perceived in multiple ways. I think fundamentally, again, to go back to what I said before, makes total sense. If I read through the nastier side of the comments, or dear lord, the filtered comments, I feel crap too, and I don't want to make videos. So I totally get where they're coming from. I think it was also, for what it's worth, worded fairly well. It doesn't come across too much like they're saying, stop being mean, or we're not going to do stuff. But there is an underlying message there of stop being mean or we'll stop talking. But also reinforcing, of course, the fact that they're still working on the game, they're dedicated to the game, and that's why they open with an update on the game. Obviously, I don't support toxicity toward them. One thing I would like to note, though, that I don't think was addressed very well in this update, is the fact that criticism is required, was required, and frankly was highly justified. Again, criticism and toxicity are two completely different things, and when it gets to the personal level, it's obviously unacceptable. But aside from that one mention toward the end about give feedback, disagree, and do it constructively, there wasn't really much of that there. And so I just would like to also reinforce that the feedback that we give, the constructive feedback that we give, does seem to be taken into account. And if you have something to add, don't let a telling off put you off. It's still valid, and it's still needed. That concludes this video updating City Skylines 2, its top priorities for 2024, and some of those insights into toxicity and the ongoings at Colossal Order. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.